It's that time again. I put out the request and you lot all answered. It's time for a Toast Talk. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you all doing today? From time to time, I put out a community post and ask you lot to ask me some questions based on Warcry or myself or basically anything. And now we're doing it. Be sure to be on the lookout for more community posts after this video asking you for even more questions. But before we get into all of that, it's time for a little bit of shilling.
I am shocked. Shocked. Well, not that shocked.
Please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, or using my Element Games affiliate link down below when buying some new Warcry gubbins. A huge shout out to my patrons and members who you can find on screen now. Badoosh. But with all of that out of the way, it's time to get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
And we are back, and I am just going to jump right in here. We're going to start with the first question by Jim Crimmins. I think we all expected rules for brands Oathbound by now. Do we still think that's happening? What setting would you like to see the next season of Warcry land in, especially given we all have plenty of meat trees now? Well, first things first, Brands Oathbound is out right now. It was added with the recent FAQ. You can find a video on that right here. Badoosh. In short, they're pretty darn good. And in terms of what setting I would like to see, honestly, I think I would like something a bit more built up, like a village, like villages or a town. Basically, give me some Mordheim action, right? Warcry Mordheim edition. Let's go. I'd be down for that. It'd be pretty darn cool. And as a side note, yeah, we are all gosh darn sick of those gosh darn meat trees. Next up, we have Algorithmic Demon Slayer Velas with info on Warcry currently in the dark, but surely more to come soon. Which factions do you believe deserve a bespoke warband next? Personally, I believe Idneth could do with a decent one. Yeah, Idneth would be my go-to straight away. Idneth on the cusp of almost being okay, simply because they have some pretty good Bladeborne. So a bespoke to bring more interest into Idneth or just make Idneth good. But he has a bit of a spanner there. I don't think we're going to get any more bespoke warbands. And I have a few reasons for that. But to quickly touch on them now, it's because we haven't heard anything yet since Briar and Bone was announced. And Briar and Bone was announced during Pyre and Flood. And Pyre and Flood came out way back in like February or something. So we haven't had any new Warcry news in like, what, 8 months? I don't think we will ever see another bespoke warband. I think we are done with them now. And Warcry is entering a new stage of life where we are getting different updates. We're getting FAQ updates that are bringing in new models, bringing in new factions, but it's tied to Age of Sigmar and not necessarily tied to Warcry's own bespoke products. And I think that's because Warcry simply hasn't been selling. That's the shopping. I'm coming. So next question is by Garrett Hates, and actually, it's not a question, it's just a statement of pure fact. Warcry, my first love. And whilst I can't say it's my first love, for I fell in love with Fantasy back in 6th edition, and then 40k back in 3rd edition, gotta admit, Warcry is definitely my recent love. So there's always that. It's worthy of love for sure. So next up, it is the legendary Wild Dice Hoarder himself, the Maps Guy, and he has 3 whole questions. But before jam, and the only real answer to that is jam before bread. Just get the jar, pop it open, and just down it in one. That's how you do it, every time. Opinions on Marmite. I don't like Marmite on things. People put like Marmite on toast, and that seems like a sin to me. But I would put Marmite in cooking. So there's that, I guess. It's an interesting ingredient. I just wouldn't have it as a main centerpiece of what I'm eating. And finally, THRALLS. Does Order need some? And I could see it, but I think it gives us the wrong impression for what Games Workshop seem to want to do with Order, and thus make them all goody two-shoes. I don't see why we can't have, like, sentient vampire fish as THRALLS. Courtesy of Idneth Deepkin. I don't know why we can't have bizarre ogre things, a la the ogre Warhulk, you know, have some basic sort of like ogre mercenaries from way back in like the fantasy days, the Dogs of War. There's definitely some weird thrall things you could totally do, but I think the idea of thralls is innately negative. innately slavey, I think. So I think thematically it's unlikely to happen, even though mechanically it could be quite cool. Next up, we have guest voice actor and of course my wife, Mrs. Toast. If you could be amazing at any sport without trying, what would you choose? And honestly, I'm already amazing at every sport. There is no sport left to choose. It's just how it is. You don't get this peak physical male form without being fantastic at literally everything you ever do. Cometron asks, counter reaction, change or keep? What's the change and why keeping it like it is? For me, counter has to change because it just innately feels bad. I don't like counter. It's usually just thrown out there as a bit of a fuck you before something dies. And it's just kind of annoying. I'm not a huge fan of counter. If I was to change it, I would still make it do damage, but I would maybe cap it. So maybe you can only do like a maximum of like 3 damage, and then that's like the hard cap on counter to kind of rein it in a bit. But honestly, I don't really know how to change it. It's just one of those things in Warcry that just feels bad, and I would like people with way more intelligence than me to come in and give it a little bit of a change up. Long Run Hobbies asks, AOS Spearhead, a blow to Warcry or a blessing in disguise? I think that Spearhead is a blessing in disguise because I don't think Spearhead will kick off at all. Look at Combat Patrol for 40k, that's not really a popular way to play the game. It's more of an entryway into Age of Sigmar as opposed to a actual blow to Warcry. The benefits of Spearhead are that you can buy those new Spearhead boxes for fairly cheap and get a whole bunch of really cool models that work in Warcry. So if you play Age of Sigmar Spearhead, you also play not only Age of Sigmar, but also Warcry. And I think that trickle down of players is just helpful. And then you just throw in the fact that it's just more cool models we get, and that's just a fun time. Dolus Milan asks, any tips for running a map-based 1-day narrative event for 8 players, 2 teams of 4? Cheers. I don't play much narrative, but from my very limited experience, I would recommend not using blessings. So the Divine Blessing mechanics are used by many players in match play, but they also trickle into casual play and narrative play. And one of the things that I don't think narrative play really benefits from is allowing blessings, as it really starts to spike models in uncomfortable directions once you start factoring in all those narrative gubbins you get to add on as well. You can get models going to insane stat lines just because you've blessed them in some way, and then they just dominate the game. And that's just not really fun to deal with, from my experience at least. So maybe make it clear that in this event that Divine Blessings aren't allowed, and move on from there. But other than that, I don't really play enough narrative to be comfortable giving any sort of like surefire advice, so sorry about that. Evan Jackson 3527 asks, everyone gets exposed to the popular Bladeborne teams. Which unpopular or unused Bladeborne would you like to see be revamped to get prominence? This is really interesting because we did just get a big Bladeborne reshuffle, and a lot of the really low end or unused or underappreciated Bladeborne are now definitely more playable. And really all it took was some points rebalancing. So look at the Iron Jaws. Morgoth's monster crushers are actually really interesting now because it allows you to take 2 brutes and only take up 1 ally slot in destruction, making brute soup much more effective than it used to be, as it still allows you to take other allies like, say, I don't know, Brewgate, Clawbacks, or Crushers, I guess. So it's really cool. That's a really cool change. But I'm also just a big fan of Idoneth, Bladeborne as a whole, and they've also gotten a bit of a revamp. It's a shame that Elthane Ill-Fated and Tamael got a points increase because they were actually already pretty darn good as a support package together. But seeing Sirene and her octopus squid thing get reduced by a significant amount of points, they are definitely now in a place that's really nice, especially when you consider that Sirene's ability is a really good support ability that just shuts down your opponent's movement options. So that's kind of cool too. So yeah, great question. So Mrs. Toast is back and she asks, if you had to choose a completely new name for yourself, what would you pick? Oh, it's a baby. Oh, she's so sad. She's going down for a nap. Poor Freya. So Mrs. Toast asks, if you had to choose a completely new name for yourself, what would you pick? Meriadoc Flagonslayer. Mrs. Toast is back again with, what's your favourite letter of the alphabet? D. Mick Binkeful asks, would Warcry be better, although maybe less popular, if you could only run bespoke warbands more in line with Necromunda? I have many thoughts on this, and Warcry would be less popular immediately, as people would be very sad that their Age of Sigmar stuff and their current warbands don't work, but in the same sense that Kill Team nuked its compendium kind of thing when that moved editions as well, and that became more popular, focusing Warcry's product line on just bespokes would actually be an interesting thing to do. And you would lose out on some things. You would lose out on the depth of list building within Warcry, but the depth of list building in Warcry is also its biggest weakness, because it's actually not all that deep in the grand scheme, because there's over 1,000 profiles in Warcry, and the vast majority just aren't used anyway, and for the most part, people just pick those meta picks that everyone else picks. So is there really depth if everyone's kind of running the same thing? Before it was Forward Crushers, Calthea Zandai or Varangard, and now it's Veximo or Dispossessed or still Varangard, and this approach to list building won't really change. And once you factor all that in, if you removed it all and just had bespokes, it wouldn't actually change all that much. But what it would do is it would make it much easier for Games Workshop to balance their game, because currently there are 63 factions in Warcry, and that is a lot of factions to keep balanced, and frankly, it isn't. And that's just a side effect of having such a large game with so many units and models and things in it. So yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing them all go away and just be bespokes, but I like Warcry as it is too, so I'm just kind of indifferent on the whole matter, really. And the final question is once again Mrs. Toast. She's on a roll here. If you could choose how you died, what would you choose? It's a completely innocent question. I'm pretty sure it is. I'm sure it is. If I was to choose how I died, it would be off-meta musings brandishing a physical replica of the Wheel Cry wheel and then beating me to death after I once again rolled so many sixes he had a full-on mental breakdown and deemed my life forfeit. But that's it. That's all the questions for this Ask Toast. Be sure to ask more questions in the comments down below and keep an eye out for community posts in the future. Until then though, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Boy howdy, it's Toast, and it's time for the post-Toast credits. A huge, huge shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, Armour Enthusiast 7, CT6497, Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Keep Lang, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Sable Saber, Mrs. Toast, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. As always, thank you so much for supporting the channel. I'll see you all next time.